Okay, the second topic we're going to tackle is password security. And essentially, we're going to take a look at some of the reasons why passwords needs to be secure, and speak about some of the ways in which we can actually have best practices and make sure that our passwords are very difficult to crack. Um, so I'm going to start off. Obviously, we've presented in the previous segment the ways in which bad actors actually do impact us. But I've also got some more statistics here around, if your passwords are hacked, what that means for businesses. So as you can see here, scraped data of 500 million LinkedIn users are being sold on the dark web. That's from reporting a couple months ago. From a few years back, a massive dump of 87 gigabytes of email addresses and passwords. Um, that was quite significant. Cisco, they confirmed that they were actually hacked by a ransomware group, and an employee's personal Google account that contained passwords synced in the web browser was the initial foothold into that environment. And another one here from the reporting we see from the dark web, 24 billion usernames, passwords are available on the dark web for sale. So it's pretty scary stuff. And the key thing to understand is having compromised password is not the end of it. Typically, that's just the starting point for more nefarious activities. So let's just walk through some of those different types of attacks utilizing stolen credentials. So the first is social engineering attacks. This is essentially where threat actors essentially try to deceive users into believing that they are in need of their assistance, for example, with the hope of actually them giving their credentials or access into the network. And we'll have a little bit of a conversation later with respect to social engineering. The second threat we've got listed is insider threats, very significant as well too. So as you appreciate, an insider threat refers to any cybersecurity risk that originates from within your organization. It typically occurs when a current or former employee or contractor or vendor or even a partner with legitimate user credentials misuses their access to the detriment of the organization, network systems and data. So a prime example of this would have been here in the UK, where there was a large multinational engineering firm that in January 2017, they were actually targeted. So that included network intrusion, data was deleted from the servers, and a couple months later in March, the IT director received a text message saying, hey, we've encrypted all of your company data. And contact was made with the police, and apparently within that particular attack, it was so severe that 60 to 80% of the UK operations for that particular firm was unable to operate, and they spent loads of time, effort, resources, money in actually trying to rebuild their systems. And this was caused by a former employee from Birmingham who eventually was convicted for that insider threat. The third is breaking into financial accounts. So once they've got those passwords, depending on the importance of the individual whose passwords they've got, they can get into certain financial systems where they can then go ahead and steal data or put requests in for transfers and start moving around money from different accounts. They can also request to pay ransom. We've gone through some examples of ransomware requests. They can also actually exfiltrate that data using credentials that have been hacked. So we find this particular attack vector used often in what we call triple extortion ransomware, which is fairly new. So essentially what the bad actors would do would be, once they've got the initial access through leaked or hacked credentials, they will then launch the ransomware. Not only will they exfiltrate the data, they would also encrypt the files and threaten to publish the files if you don't pay the ransom. But also to what they then do is they go after your customers for whom they've got the data for, and actually threaten to expose or publish the credentials unless the customers actually pay a ransom as well. So pretty complex and nefarious stuff going on out there. And the last one is credential stuffing. So This is basically an automated injection of stolen username and passwords into a website login form in order to fraudulently gain access to those user accounts. So this is common because many users will reuse the same password, username, and email. And when those credentials are exposed, whether through phishing or data breach, then those stolen credentials are submitted into dozens or hundreds of other sites that can allow an attacker to compromise those accounts too. Right? So, yeah, how secure is your password? What we've got up here are 50 of the most common passwords. If you see one of your passwords on screen, don't feel left out. Many of us have been guilty of having pretty weak passwords, but it just goes to show how poorly we are in terms of doing a job of having good passwords. And there's some reporting around this. So Keepa has produced in their password malpractice report of 2021 some pretty scary statistics of how we actually do treat password security. So as you can see, 57% of those respondents, I think they had interviewed several thousand workplace employees, but 57% of those surveyed actually wrote their passwords on sticky notes. 55%, as you can see, saved their passwords on their phones, password saved in the cloud. But also too, let's take a look on the graphic on the right, where 31% of the respondents used their children's names or birthdays. Okay, 37% used their employer's name, and 44% actually reused passwords across personal and work-related accounts. So just making themselves very susceptible to password compromise. And here's why it's important. With the current tools that are available to threat actors and bad actors, it's really not that hard to crack passwords. Okay, so let's take a look here. First, we'll take a look at the first row, which mentions the number of characters. So let's say 8 characters, for example. And if you go all the way to the last column on that row, it can take just 8 hours to actually crack an 8-character password. Okay, if we increase the number of characters and the complexity, so let's choose 14 characters, numbers included upper and lowercase letters, that is going to take 9 million years to crack. So this kind of underscores why it's important to make sure that you have very robust, very strong passwords that cannot be easily broken by the bad actors. So let's take a look at some of the techniques that the bad actors actually use to crack passwords. So the first example is a brute force attack, which is an attempt to discover a password by essentially systematically trying every possible combination of letters, numbers, and symbols until you discover the one correct combination that works. And if your website requires user authentication, you are a good target for brute force attacks. Next, we have spraying. So password spraying is where the hacker takes common non-complex passwords and essentially, let's say, spray them across an entire organization, hoping that a single user might be using something like, ABC123 password, their pet's name, for example, or any one of the most utilized passwords that are publicly available. Dictionary attack. So a dictionary attack is a variant of the brute force technique where the attacker runs through common words and phrases such as those that would be found from a dictionary to kind of guess those passwords. The fourth entry we have here is rainbow table. So this approach involves using different words from the original password in order to generate other possible passwords. So these malicious actors can keep a list of what they call a rainbow table with them. And this list contains leaked privity cracked passwords, which will make the overall password cracking method more efficient. All right. So let's take a look at some of those password don'ts that actually make it very easy for bad actors to decrypt your passwords. So First one, do not use personal information in your password. Remember to avoid using personal information like names, company names, birthdays, addresses, hobbies, etc. In the event of a cyber attack, a hacker might use, let's say, a bot to scan your existing social media profiles or social profiles. And in addition, they can scan your friends' profiles and score your employer's website for keywords to aid in that unauthorized access. Leak speak. So leak speak, also known as hack speak or simply leaked, is essentially where, as you can see on the screen, you substitute the words of letters with numbers or special characters that look quite similar to that letter. So we generally have this misconception that leak speak is secure, but it really isn't. A third, sharing passwords with coworkers, and we get it. Sometimes sharing a password with a colleague can save time and effort. There's nothing more frustrating than being close to finishing off a project, for example, and suddenly have an access issue. So what's the harm? Share a password. But password sharing, a weak password creation, is responsible statistically for 8 out of 10 security breaches, according to a report by Verizon. Okay. In addition, if a hacker actually does gain entry, a shared password can have far more disastrous implications for database protection. Using the same password on multiple platforms. Sorry. So as I mentioned, bad actors have different techniques where they essentially reuse passwords across multiple platforms for a particular target because they know humans. They want to make life easy for themselves. And so if you've got multiple passwords if you've got the same password across multiple platforms, then the bad actor is just going to keep trying those passwords across those platforms. Hopefully they will be successful. That's what they're hoping for. And the last one, obviously, writing down your passwords, whether it's on a post-it note, whether it's in a OneNote, a book. Not a good practice. If someone gets their hands on that physical copy of your password, then you're compromised. Okay, and also to having a post-it notes, displayed around the office, anyone within the office can easily shoulder surf and they know your password. Okay, so not very good practices. All right, so let's test the audience. Let's see how's your password security. And what we have here is a short quiz, as you can see, available at view.ceros.com. And we're just going to walk through a few of these questions here, just to get an understanding of, do you understand what good password security looks like? All right, so I'll click on Start Quiz. Let's look at the first question. We're only going to do 3 of them. How often do hacking-related data breaches leverage stolen or weak passwords? 10%, 27%, 63, 81% of the time. Given how often this happens, I'm going to choose 81% of the time. And yep, coming from Verizon's communications report, 2017, 81% of the time that occurs. Another question. Common words and phrases are safe for passwords as long as they are easy for you to remember, or at least 12 characters long and include a number and punctuation mark, are in a language other than English. None of the above. I am going to say none of the above are actually safe. And that's correct. None of these particular approaches are safe. Let's do just one more. Okay, let's skip ahead. So, what does good look like from a password security perspective? So let's walk through what that would be. So firstly, delete accounts you don't use. Okay, bad actors are looking for the weakest link, any opening into your network. And essentially, for myself as well, there are many websites we have to sign up to and we forget about them. And after many years, those passwords you use are probably very, very poor. So when you get a chance, do a bit of decluttering and delete any accounts that you don't actually use. Choose 3 words at random Okay, so at random. So following this method gives you a long password in plain English and a password that's able to avoid brute force password attacks and also to prevent a dictionary attack. Also, make sure that your passwords are unique, they're complex, and they're long passwords for every single account. So make sure they're unique and you're not reusing the same password. Dark web monitoring. So check the dark web for sale of yours as well as your company's data and credentials. And if you find that they are, you're then able to take the appropriate action to mitigate that risk, which might be, resetting that password, making it much stronger, or as well as implementing the fifth entry, which is multi-factor authentication. So using more than one method for authenticating the user, which could be, for example, something like a password or username, something you have using your phone and sending an MFA prompt to that phone for a code to be returned, or something that you are using probably some biometric data. And lastly, password manager. I can't recommend this enough. So a password manager, for those who don't know, is an app on your phone, your tablet, your computer that stores your passwords, so you don't need to remember these long, complex passwords. And once you've logged into a password manager using your master password, it can then generate and remember passwords for all of your online accounts. So here are some examples of some really good practices you can use to make sure that your passwords are very strong and secure.
Okay, guys. So share your queries and questions with Andre in the Q&A, and he'll be happy to demystify any of the content covered. Andre, over to you.
Yes, I appreciate that, Matt. We did have a question come through that I wanted to expand on the answer. So the question was, you mentioned they can now bypass MFA. Is this in the form of email? So yes, as we've seen in the presentation, email phishing is the primary attack vector that's used. 90, probably close to 90%, well, I think 85 to 90%. So in this particular new attack we've seen, what happens is it starts with an email, a phishing email, probably to say, hey, reset your password expired. Someone that clicks on the malicious link within the email, and that starts the process of getting around the MFA. So what would happen would be there would be a phishing site that's set up by the bad actor, and when you send her a request to reset your password, they would intercept that communication. It's what's called a man-in-the-middle attack, and then pass that communication on to the, let's say, Office 365, the original website. So they would sit in the middle, capture all the communication, capture your MFA code that's been sent or the prompt. They would capture passwords and act as that proxy to send you information to get you authorized. And once you're authorized within the website, they then take control of that session and redirect you to another link, possibly like a phishing or dodgy link, and they then control and have access to your account. So that's why, as I mentioned previously, the only way to target or tackle these is to have those multiple layers. So having MFA, having DNS filtering capabilities, having email security, EDR, all these different layers in conjunction will help to mitigate lots of these different attacks that we see. Okay. How do you do dark web monitoring? Very good question. So I wouldn't recommend that you do it yourself. It would take, signing into the dark web and navigating a very scary place. Fortunately, there are some tools out there that can do it for you, an organization. So Leaf IT, they have access to a dark web tool where once they provide your email address or your company's domain, that tool is going to actually go to check to see if those credentials are on the dark web and then return that information to Leaf IT. And they can also, as well, if needed, continuously monitor the dark web. So if there are new credentials that are found on the dark web, once again, Leaf IT would be notified, and they yourselves would then respond to that particular exposure. Another question, how secure is a password manager? Yeah, I mean, they're quite secure, but once again, obviously with the recent news stories, there have been a case where at least one of the password management companies were actually breached. But the behind the scenes, the technology and encryption and the methods that they use are pretty robust. So, for example, they don't. Well, the good password managers out there, they don't store your passwords. They don't store your master password as well. And so they will always recommend that you make sure that you either know that master password or there's a hint that you can use in the event that you forgot it to be able to remember it. But they use very advanced encryption capabilities. What they've done as well too, I've noticed, is that they've added multiple layers of authentication as well too, to address some of the different threats out there. So the point about password managers and very secure technologies, but once again, organizations, big, small, major, if they're in the tech industry, they all get targeted because there's always a weak link, which is typically a user not doing what they are supposed to do. All right, so hoped I've been able to answer those questions sufficiently. I'll just probably, Matt, just maybe wait for another minute or so to see if there are any other questions that come through. But I guess the key takeaway I want everyone in the audience to have is that, the threats are constantly changing, as with any aspect of our lives, whether it's business, whether it's relationships, whether it's social, things change over time. When I was growing up, there was no such thing as a cell phone. There was no such thing as social media. So times change, and you have to adapt to those changes, whether they are threats that we're seeing from a cybersecurity perspective. So I think staying abreast of those threats, having an understanding of what those threats are and what the risk is to your business would be very useful, and then having the right conversation with Leaf IT to understand, hey, which solutions are appropriate for the threats that my business might see. Okay, so no other questions. I want to thank everyone for the very good questions that were asked in the chat. And Matt, I will hand it back over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Andre. So for us now, it's a question of thanking you all for coming. So thank you for your participation, and thank you, Andre, for your generous insights. To sum up, as Andre said, cybersecurity is ever evolving, and it does require continuous learning and adaptation. We hope this webinar has equipped you with some valuable knowledge and practical insights. It's important to remember that you are an essential line of defense in safeguarding your digital assets. For your security, follow some of the best practices discussed today, share your knowledge with others, and try to create a culture of cybersecurity awareness. Thank you once again for joining us today. Make sure you join us for part 2 in our webinar series. And from everyone at Leaf and ConnectWise, have a good day.